Stephen's criticism of the religious establishment and his exaltation of Christ enraged the religious leaders, so they stoned him to death. As Christ's earthly ministry drew to a close, he knew he would soon leave his disciples to carry on the work without his personal supervision. He sought to encourage them and to prepare them for the future. He did not deceive them with false hopes. He knew he was about to be separated from them, to leave them as sheep among wolves. He knew that they would suffer persecution, be cast out of synagogues, and be thrown into prison for proclaiming him as the Messiah. In speaking of their future, Jesus said some of them would be killed. He knew that in their coming trials they would remember his words and be strengthened to believe in him as the Redeemer. And that brings us to our key verse for today, which reads, "As they stoned him, Stephen prayed, 'Lord Jesus, receive my spirit.'" Acts chapter 7, verse 59. Until this verse, Stephen had been preaching on the Old Testament history of God's chosen people. Now he gives the moral of the story in explicit terms. Stephen showed how the Jews rejected God's many calls to them through the prophets and how the very religious Jews he preached to were just as stubborn as their ancestors had been. Stephen reminded the people of the history of the Jewish people and how they persecuted prophets and even killed them. Yet, we need to remember that not all Jews participated in the crucifixion of Jesus. In fact, Stephen himself was a Jew. So each of us, no matter what our race or other ethnic affiliation is responsible for our response to Jesus. Stephen's speech made them furious, particularly his accusation about them not being true observers of the law of Moses. Stephen, being full of the Holy Ghost, had a vision of the glory of God. He saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And why was Jesus standing instead of sitting at God's right hand? Both expressions are symbolic of the authority given to Christ. One interpretation is that Stephen testified that Jesus had arrived in the presence of God and had received all authority, thus fulfilling the vision of Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. Another is that Christ was standing either as Stephen's advocate or to welcome him into his presence. The right hand means the place of honor. The actions all happened fast. Cried aloud, stopped, rushed, cast out, and stoned, indicating a repeated and continued action. Yet these events had some semblance of legality if the witnesses here were the first to start the stoning as specified by law. They laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. Stephen fell to his knees and cried out, "Lord, do not remember this sin against them." Literally, fix not this sin upon them. Stephen did not pray for his own vindication, he prayed for mercy. In Acts chapter 7, verse 60, the phrase, "he fell asleep," is characteristic of the New Testament expression for death. The same Greek word is also used to refer to sleep, rest, lying down, and again, death. At the time of this event, Saul was beginning his vigorous persecution of the Christians, but perhaps after his conversion, the martyrdom of Stephen was in the back of his mind. So here's our lesson. Stephen confronted their idolatry of the temple. In doing so, they tried to confine God within the temple, yet God is too big to fit in any temple humanity can make. On a more subtle level, many Christians do the same thing. It may not be the worship of a church building, though certainly that does take place from time to time, but it is the confinement of God to one place. The whole idea behind a permanent stationary temple is "you come to me." This is why Israel, though they were a light to the nations, mainly thought in terms of the world coming to them for salvation. Through the church, God would show a different heart. "I will come to you," including to the Gentiles.